There is a study, conducted at UCLA in 23, in which researchers placed people inside an fMRI scanner and told them they were playing a simple ball-tossing game with two other players over a network. The game was called Cyberball. The participants would watch a figure on a screen passing a virtual ball, receive it occasionally, throw it back. Simple. Then, partway through, the other players stopped including them. They just stopped throwing the ball. The participants sat there, watching two figures play without them, for about 45 seconds. That was the entire experiment. 45 seconds of being left out of a children's ball game with people they'd never met and would never meet. The brain scans showed something that took the researchers, Naomi Eisenberger and Matthew Lieberman, a moment to accept. The regions that lit up in response to that 45 seconds of social exclusion were the same regions that activate when you burn your hand or break a bone. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, the pain matrix, not a metaphorical overlap, not similar areas, the same circuits, the same tissue. The obvious question is why? Why would an organism evolve to process social exclusion using the same hardware that processes a knife wound? And the answer, once you sit with it, is more unsettling than the finding itself. It's not a malfunction. It's the point. For most of human evolutionary history, being removed from the group wasn't a social inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Primates who were cast out didn't just feel awkward. They died of exposure, of predation, of starvation. The group was survival. Belonging wasn't a preference. It was oxygen. And evolution, which optimizes ruthlessly, did what it always does. It co-opted an existing alarm system rather than building a new one. Physical pain already works. It was already loud, already impossible to ignore, already capable of stopping behavior and demanding attention. So the brain borrowed that circuitry and wired social threat directly into it. Naomi Eisenberger called this the pain overlap theory. The idea is that social attachment pain, the ache of rejection, exclusion, loss, is not a metaphor borrowed from physical pain. It is, in a very literal neurological sense, the same thing. Two different inputs, one ancient alarm. The reason we say heartbreak and gut punch and wounded pride is not because we're being poetic. It's because the part of the brain generating those experiences doesn't know the difference. Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary formalized this in 1995 with what they called the need to belong hypothesis. The argument that human beings have a fundamental, biologically based drive to form and maintain social bonds that is as basic and urgent as hunger or thirst, not a cultural preference, a need. When you frustrate a need, you get pain. That's what needs do when they go unmet. The elegance of the argument is also its horror. There is no version of you that doesn't require other people. It was written in before you had a say. The Eisenberger study was just the opening frame. What came after was more disturbing. In 2010, Nathan DeWall at the University of Kentucky ran a series of experiments on social pain and a common over-the-counter drug, acetaminophen, Tylenol, the kind of thing you take for a headache. His team gave participants either acetaminophen or a placebo daily for 3 weeks and asked them to record their feelings of social rejection and hurt feelings at the end of each day. The acetaminophen group reported significantly less social pain. 3 weeks of Tylenol and rejection hurt less. Then they scanned participants' brains while exposing them to social exclusion. The acetaminophen group showed reduced activation in the dorsal and the anterior insula. The pain matrix, a drug designed to block physical pain signals, also blunted the neural response to being left out. The researchers were careful. They didn't say this was a treatment recommendation. But the data said something clear. The mechanism was shared enough that blocking one blocked the other. The opioid system is central to this. Endogenous opioids, the brain's own pain-relieving chemicals, are released in response to both physical injury and social bonding. Touch, warmth, closeness, they trigger opioid release, and social rejection suppresses it. This is why the loss of a close relationship doesn't just feel bad. It feels like withdrawal, because neurochemically it is. Jacques Panksepp, who spent decades mapping the emotional systems of the mammalian brain, demonstrated that the opioid system governs both physical pain and social distress in a deeply integrated way. Block opioid receptors, and you blunt the pleasure of social contact. That same system, running in reverse, generates the specific quality of grief, the hollow, physical ache of someone being absent from a space they used to fill. There is a cardiac condition called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. The name comes from a Japanese octopus trap with a narrow neck and wide base, because under intense stress the left ventricle of the heart deforms into that shape. The condition is triggered by sudden, acute emotional distress, the death of a loved one, a devastating piece of news, a shock that arrives without warning. The heart muscle temporarily fails. It is frequently misdiagnosed as a heart attack, because to the patient it feels like one, and to initial imaging it looks like one. This is what the medical literature calls broken heart syndrome. Not metaphor, not poetry, an actual structural cardiac event precipitated by emotional pain. The body does not wait for permission to make grief physical. The sociometer theory, proposed by Mark Leary in the 1990s, adds another dimension. Leary's argument is that self-esteem is not primarily about how we feel about ourselves in isolation. It is a monitor, a real-time gauge of our standing in the social group. The emotional sting of rejection isn't just about the specific rejection event. It's the meter dropping. It's the signal that your inclusion in the group, your survival currency, has just decreased. Self-esteem, in this framing, isn't vanity. It's a vital sign. Feeling good about yourself is the system reporting that you are adequately included. Feeling worthless is the same system reporting a threat. This helps explain something that otherwise seems irrational. Why rejection from people we don't care about still stings. Strangers. Online commenters. People whose opinions hold no practical weight in our lives. Leary's sociometer doesn't discriminate. It was built for a world where every social signal mattered, where the judgment of even peripheral group members could affect your standing, and therefore, your survival. That machine is now running in a world where you receive feedback from thousands and millions of strangers simultaneously, in real time, and it cannot tell the difference between a tribal elder's disapproval and an anonymous reply from an account 3 months old. Kipling Williams extended the cyberball work into a substantial body of research on ostracism, the deliberate act of being ignored and excluded. What he found was that even the most temporary and obviously meaningless ostracism produced a reliable cluster of psychological effects: threatened belonging, lowered self-esteem, reduced sense of control, and a challenge to one's sense of meaningful existence. Not just that felt bad. A fundamental destabilization of the 4 things that human psychology most depends on. Williams also found that these effects appeared even when participants knew they were being excluded by a computer. Even when they were told explicitly that the other players were a program. The knowledge changed nothing. The pain arrived anyway. This plays out in ways we recognize, but rarely examine clearly. Social rejection in the workplace. Being passed over, excluded from meetings, talked around as though you're furniture, produces a constellation of effects that look, neurologically, identical to low-grade chronic pain. The research on workplace ostracism, much of it developed by Jane Ferris and Sandra Robinson, shows that being ignored by colleagues is more damaging to mental and physical health than being actively bullied. Bullying at least acknowledges you exist. Ostracism doesn't. The alarm system that says you are not in the group keeps firing because the signal never resolves. It doesn't know when to stop because there's no moment of resolution, no confrontation to process, nothing to metabolize. Romantic rejection activates the same circuits, but with greater intensity and a different neurochemical signature. Helen Fisher's fMRI work on people who had recently been rejected by romantic partners showed activity in the ventral tegmental area, the region associated with reward, motivation, and craving. Not only pain, craving. The rejected person wasn't simply suffering. They were, neurologically, in a state very similar to someone experiencing drug withdrawal and simultaneous obsessive desire for the drug. The brain was treating the absent person as a withheld reward rather than a concluded chapter. This is why the behavior of recently rejected people can look compulsive and self-destructive, because in a neurobiological sense it is both. Social media has done something interesting and terrible with all of this. It has taken a system designed to monitor social standing in groups of roughly 150 people. The Dunbar number, the cognitive ceiling on meaningful social relationships, and exposed it to populations of thousands and millions, with a feedback mechanism that operates continuously. The sociometer has no ceiling setting. It was not built for scale. Every public piece of disapproval, every follower count that dips, every post that generates only silence. The brain processes all of it as social threat data, because the architecture cannot distinguish relevance from noise. The machine runs without pause and without rest. If you've ever noticed that rejection produces a specific physical sensation, a heaviness in the chest, a kind of nausea, something that sits in the body rather than purely in the mind. That's not coincidence or oversensitivity. That's the pain matrix. The sensation is real. The tissue is genuinely activated. And that distinction matters for how you understand what's happening when it occurs, because the instinct is to evaluate it as if it were purely a thinking problem. The mistake is to approach it as though the right thought or the right perspective would dissolve it immediately. It won't. Not because you're weak or insufficiently rational, but because you are dealing with a system that predates rational thought by a very long margin. What the cognitive layer can do is contextualize. Knowing that the system is an ancient alarm that cannot discriminate between genuine exclusion threats and trivial social noise doesn't silence the alarm, but it changes your relationship to it. You can hear the alarm and understand that it is not always an accurate description of what is happening. James Pennebaker's decades of research on expressive writing showed that writing about painful social experiences in detail repeatedly over several days reduced both psychological distress and measurable physical health markers. Immune function improved. Doctor visits decreased. Not because writing fixed the social situation, but because the act of translating emotional pain into language, giving it structure, narrative, sequence, cause, and effect, appears to reduce the raw activation of the distress systems. The brain processes differently when it has a story rather than just a signal. Narrative is not a cure. It is a form of digestion. What also emerges from the research, not as prescription, but as observation, is that the pain system is dramatically miscalibrated for modern life. It treats a stranger's criticism with the same urgency it assigns to genuine social rupture. The signal intensity does not reflect actual threat magnitude. Developing some capacity to observe that urgency without immediately believing its threat assessment is not suppression. It is something closer to neurological literacy, knowing what system is speaking, understanding the context in which it was built, before deciding whether to act on what it's saying. There is something philosophically strange about the fact that belonging and physical pain share the same neural real estate. It suggests that for the organism, the two things, connection and pain, are not opposites. They are part of the same system. Pain marks what matters. We feel physical pain most intensely for threats to the body's integrity. We feel social pain most intensely for threats to the self's integrity, its membership in the group, its sense of being recognized, included, present to others. The overlap isn't accidental. It's the brain's way of assigning weight. On what the neuroscience of rejection actually describes, when you follow it to its end, is the cost of being a social species. Not a flaw in the design, a feature of the design. You were built to need other people with the same urgency that you were built to need air. And the system that enforces that need is the same system that enforces the body's survival, which means that every time rejection hurts, really hurts, in the chest, in the stomach, in the fog that follows you into the next morning, it is the oldest part of you insisting on something true. That connection is not optional, that you were not designed for isolation. that the need is real, even when the specific event that triggered it is not. Whether that is comforting or not depends entirely on what you do with the information. The machine will run. It ran before you were conscious of it, and it will run after any particular rejection has faded. The question is whether you can learn to hear it as signal rather than sentence, as the cost of being built the way you were, rather than evidence of something broken in you. The alarm is not wrong, the connection matters. It is only wrong about how catastrophic this particular moment is. Learning to tell the difference is not therapy. It is just paying attention to what you actually are.